Picture this. It is July 16, 1945, in the pre-dawn darkness of the New Mexico desert. A small group of men stand a few miles away from a tower holding a device that will forever change human civilization. General Leslie Groves, the iron-fisted military leader who built this entire impossible project, stands nervously watching. The scientists surrounding him, the brightest minds of our generation, are watching too. And at precisely 5:29 in the morning, when that device detonates, the entire landscape lights up brighter than the sun itself. A fireball of pure nuclear energy rises into the sky, creating a mushroom cloud that towers over 40,000 feet into the atmosphere, visible for over 100 miles away. The blast wave hits them with such force that it knocks grown men to the ground. This is the moment. This is when America proved to the entire world that it is the undisputed master of science, engineering, and industrial might. This is the Trinity test, and it is the most spectacular achievement in the history of American technological innovation. What you are about to witness is the incredible true story of how America built the atomic bomb, how we ended the Pacific War with a single devastating weapon, and how we became the world's only nuclear superpower, a position that would define the entire second half of the 20th century. To understand the magnitude of what America accomplished with the Manhattan Project, you have to understand where we started. In 1939, the most brilliant scientific minds in the world were divided. Some of the greatest physicists who ever lived were scattered across multiple countries. But America did something extraordinary. We gathered them. We brought Albert Einstein himself to our shores, fleeing Nazi persecution. We recruited Enrico Fermi, one of the greatest experimental physicists of all time. We convinced Robert Oppenheimer, a theoretical genius, to leave his academic position and lead a secret scientific city in the desert. We attracted Edward Teller, Leo Szilard, and hundreds of other world-class scientists who understood that the Nazi threat meant we had to develop nuclear weapons before Germany did. This was not just a scientific challenge, this was a race for civilization itself. Because if Nazi Germany had developed the atomic bomb first, if Hitler had possessed nuclear weapons while America was still figuring out conventional warfare, the entire world would have been enslaved under a 1,000-year Nazi Reich. But America did something that no other nation on earth could have done. We didn't just match the scientific innovation of our enemies, we surpassed them completely. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt understood this immediately. When Einstein and other scientists warned him in 1939 that atomic fission was possible and that a nuclear weapon was theoretically feasible, Roosevelt made the decision to launch the Manhattan Project. He authorized research, he allocated funding. But here is the thing that made America different from every other nation. We didn't just think about nuclear weapons in the abstract. We committed every single resource, every dollar, every engineer, every scientist, every factory worker to actually building them. By 1942, the United States Army Corps of Engineers had officially taken over what was called the Manhattan Engineer District, and they placed at its head one of the most remarkable military figures in American history, General Leslie Richard Groves. General Groves was an engineer. He was a construction genius. He had already overseen the construction of the Pentagon, the largest office building in the world, in under 1.5 years. He had managed massive military construction projects during the mobilization for war. And when he took over the Manhattan Project in September of 1942, he did something that seemed absolutely impossible. He took on the role of what he himself called the impresario of a $2 billion grand opera with thousands of temperamental stars in all walks of life. This is where America's true greatness showed itself. Groves had to manage not just scientists, and managing brilliant scientists is like herding cats because each one believes their own research is more important than everything else, but he had to coordinate an entire industrial empire. He had to build secret cities. He had to acquire raw materials from around the world. By September 19, 1942, which was literally just 2 days after his appointment, Groves had already moved mountains to secure the most critical material needed to build the bomb. Within 6 months, he had identified 3 separate construction sites: Oak Ridge in Tennessee, Hanford in Washington State, and Los Alamos in New Mexico. He had contracted with DuPont, one of America's greatest industrial corporations, to oversee plutonium production. He had convinced Robert Oppenheimer, a man with no military experience, no administrative background, to become the scientific director of the entire project, and he had gotten moving. Groves was a man who did not accept delays. He did not accept bureaucratic red tape. He saw the problem, he identified the solution, and he executed with ruthless efficiency. Now, the Manhattan Project was not just an engineering challenge. The problem was that nobody had ever built an atomic bomb before. We're not talking about applying existing technology. We're not talking about scaling up something that already worked. We're talking about pushing the boundaries of human scientific knowledge to create something that had never existed. The challenges were absolutely staggering. First, you need fissile material. You need uranium-235 or plutonium-239. But here's the problem. Uranium exists in nature as 99.3% uranium-238, which is not fissile, and only 0.7% uranium-235, which is fissile. So you have to separate them. You have to enrich uranium so that you have enough U-235 to create a critical mass. How do you separate 2 isotopes of the same element that have almost identical chemical properties? That is not a theoretical problem. That is not something you can figure out on a blackboard. You have to actually build machines that can do it at an industrial scale. This is where Ernest Lawrence, a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, came in. Lawrence had invented the cyclotron, a particle accelerator that was revolutionary. He designed modified versions of his cyclotrons, called calatrons, named after the University of California, that could be used to electromagnetically separate uranium isotopes. These were not small devices. These were massive, complex machines that had never been built before at the scale required. Oak Ridge, Tennessee became the site of the world's largest electromagnetic separation plant. Massive buildings were constructed. Thousands of workers, most of them having no idea what they were actually building, were hired and trained. The scale was almost incomprehensible. Millions and millions of dollars were spent. Experimental calatrons were built, tested, refined, and then rebuilt. By 1944, Oak Ridge was operating at full capacity, producing enriched uranium on a scale that was previously impossible. But uranium enrichment was only one path. There was also plutonium. Plutonium-239 was a synthetic element. It did not exist in nature. You had to create it by bombarding uranium with neutrons inside a nuclear reactor. This meant you had to build the world's first large-scale nuclear reactors. In December 1942, at the University of Chicago, under a football stadium, Enrico Fermi and his team of scientists achieved the world's first controlled nuclear chain reaction. They called it Chicago Pile 1. Fermi had calculated that when they had enough enriched uranium, they could create a self-sustaining chain reaction. Neutrons splitting atoms, releasing more neutrons, which split more atoms in a cascade reaction that could be controlled. When the Geiger counter started beeping faster and faster, and Fermi calculated that the reaction was self-sustaining, the room went silent. They had done it. They had proven that a controlled nuclear chain reaction was possible. But again, this was just a proof of concept. You cannot build an atomic bomb with one pile under a football stadium. You need massive plutonium production facilities. Hanford Engineer Works in Washington State was constructed for exactly this purpose. It became one of the largest industrial sites in human history. Massive nuclear reactors were built. Chemical separation plants were constructed.
At peak production, Hanford was producing plutonium at a rate that seemed impossible. The facility consumed enough electricity to power a major city. The Columbia River was diverted to provide cooling water. Thousands of workers labored around the clock in complete secrecy, not knowing that they were producing the material that would make history. And think about this, all of this, Oak Ridge, Hanford, Los Alamos, all of the supporting infrastructure was built during wartime, while America was simultaneously fighting Japan in the Pacific and Germany in Europe. While we were producing hundreds of thousands of tanks, millions of rifles, and thousands of aircraft, we were building entirely new cities to support a secret project that most Americans did not even know existed. General Groves managed all of this with an iron fist. He was known for his incredible work ethic. He could work 24-hour stretches without sleeping. He was known for his decisiveness. He did not tolerate excuses. He understood that the war in the Pacific was still raging, that American soldiers were dying in the Pacific Islands, and that every day of delay meant American lives lost. So he pushed. He drove the project forward with an intensity that was almost inhuman. But none of this would have been possible without the men of science who made it work. Robert Oppenheimer was a theoretical physicist, a man who had spent most of his career in academic research. He had no military experience, he had no experience managing large projects. But Groves looked at him and saw something special. He saw a man who understood physics at the deepest level, who could grasp the theoretical problems that stood in the way of building a bomb, and who could inspire other scientists to solve impossible problems. Oppenheimer was brought to Los Alamos in 1943, and there, in the high desert of New Mexico, he led a community of some of the world's greatest scientific minds. He had Enrico Fermi there. He had John von Neumann, the mathematical genius. He had Richard Feynman, the brilliant young physicist. He had physicists from America, Britain, Canada, and other allied nations. And Oppenheimer somehow managed this incredibly difficult group, brilliant, egotistical men who were used to being the smartest person in the room, and guided them toward a single goal: building an atomic bomb. Leo Szilard was the brilliant Hungarian physicist who had first realized that an uncontrolled nuclear chain reaction could produce an enormous explosion. Szilard had worked to convince Einstein to warn President Roosevelt about the possibility of a German atomic bomb. Szilard was the intellectual seed from which the entire Manhattan Project grew. Without Szilard's insight, without his ability to see the implications of nuclear fission for weapons, the project might never have been launched. Edward Teller was another crucial figure, a physicist who would later become known as the father of the hydrogen bomb. Ernest Lawrence, with his calatrons, showed that uranium enrichment on an industrial scale was possible. Niels Bohr, one of the founding fathers of quantum mechanics, contributed his wisdom. These were the men who pushed the boundaries of human knowledge so far that they created something that had never existed. And here is what is most remarkable. These scientists, many of them, understood the profound moral implications of what they were building. They were not naive. They knew they were creating a weapon of unprecedented destructive power. Many of them had fled Nazi Germany and other oppressive regimes. They were not building this weapon because they believed, completely and correctly, that if Nazi Germany developed the atomic bomb first, human civilization would end. The bomb was not a weapon to be used casually. It was an ultimate weapon, a deterrent, a way to ensure that Germany could not achieve global domination through nuclear weapons. That is the context in which these men made the most significant contribution to American power in the 20th century.
But the scientists could not have done any of this without something that was uniquely American: our industrial capacity. During World War II, the United States achieved something that has never been matched before or since. We became the most productive industrial nation in human history. By 1945, America was producing more than half of all manufactured goods in the entire world. Think about that number.
The entire planet was producing goods. Britain, the Soviet Union, Germany, Italy, Japan, Canada, every other nation combined, and the United States was producing more than half of everything. Our factories produced 2 million army trucks. We built 193,000 artillery pieces. We constructed 86,000 tanks. We manufactured 317,000 aircraft. We built more than 2,700 Liberty ships. These are not small numbers. These are staggering numbers that demonstrate the absolute dominance of American manufacturing during the Second World War. The Willow Run bomber plant in Michigan is a perfect example of this industrial genius. Before the war, it was farmland. In 1943, Henry Ford and the federal government partnered to build the most ambitious aircraft factory ever conceived. The facility was 3.5 million square feet under one roof. It had an assembly line 1 mile long that made a 90-degree turn halfway through to avoid property taxes in Wayne County. Think about that. They could not just extend the assembly line straight because it would have crossed into a different county with higher taxes. So they designed the building to bend. An entirely new factory, one of the largest in the world, built in the middle of a war, and it was designed in a way that would save money on taxes. This is American engineering and American business thinking combined at its finest. At its peak, Willow Run was producing one complete B-24 bomber every 63 minutes. Not per day, every hour, 63 minutes. 8,685 bombers were produced at that single facility during the war. The facility employed 20,000 workers. The American workforce had been transformed by war production. 6.5 million women entered the industrial workforce, many of them for the first time in their lives. African Americans found new opportunities in defense industries. Americans from rural areas migrated to cities to work in factories. The entire nation mobilized. Rubber was rationed, gasoline was rationed, sugar was rationed. Every resource was directed toward producing the weapons needed to win the war. Americans accepted this because we understood that we were fighting for our survival as a free nation. The Detroit Arsenal tank plant produced over 22,000 tanks during the war. The facility was revolutionary. Albert Kahn, an innovative factory designer, had pioneered new manufacturing techniques that allowed for continuous flow production. Components moved smoothly between stations, and assembly was synchronized perfectly. The factory operated around the clock on 3 shifts. In December 1942, a single month, the Detroit Arsenal produced 896 M4 Sherman tanks. That was more tanks than Germany produced in the same period across all of its factories combined. Let that sink in. A single American factory in a single month produced more tanks than the entire German industrial machine could produce. This is what industrial dominance looks like. Kaiser shipyards on the Pacific coast produced Liberty ships at an almost unimaginable pace. Early in the war, it took 244 days to build a cargo ship. By 1944, through continuous process improvement and workforce training, Kaiser had reduced that to 39 to 42 days, a 6-fold improvement in construction speed in just a few years. At peak production, American shipyards were launching 3 Liberty ships per day. 2,700 Liberty ships were built during the war. These ships, carrying tanks, trucks, ammunition, and supplies, were the bloodline of the Allied war effort, and America built them faster than the Germans and Japanese could sink them. This industrial miracle did not happen by accident. The federal government established the War Production Board, which controlled allocation of raw materials, established production priorities, and resolved conflicts between competing demands for steel, aluminum, copper, and rubber. The American economy was completely mobilized for war. The gross domestic product doubled between 1940 and 1945. Unemployment, which had plagued the nation throughout the 1930s Great Depression, disappeared. By 1943, America had achieved full employment. Every person who wanted to work could find a job, and most of those jobs were producing weapons for the war effort. This was the industrial capacity that made the Manhattan Project possible. Without American factories, without American engineering, without American labor working around the clock, the atomic bomb could not have been built. And all of this effort came down to one single moment. July 16, 1945, 5:29 in the morning in the New Mexico desert. The device, codenamed Gadget, was hoisted 100 feet into the air on a steel tower. Below, at various distances, military officers, scientists, and journalists were positioned with protective equipment. General Groves was positioned several miles away. He was nervous. The calculations showed that the bomb should work, but nobody had ever actually detonated a nuclear weapon before. There was a possibility, however remote, that something could go wrong, that there could be an unexpected reaction, that in some worst-case scenario, the chain reaction could not be stopped. Robert Oppenheimer stood in the control bunker watching the instruments. As 5:29 approached, the tension became almost unbearable. The countdown proceeded, and then, explosion. The fireball was brilliant beyond description, brighter than any human had ever seen, hotter than the surface of the sun. The blast wave traveled outward at tremendous speed. The ground shook. Eyewitnesses reported that the heat was felt from miles away. A newscaster who was observing from a distance reported that it felt like standing in front of an open furnace. The mushroom cloud rose and rose and rose, climbing to 40,000 feet, to 50,000 feet, up and up into the sky. The base of the mushroom was miles wide. The observers stood in stunned silence. Most of them did not speak for several minutes afterward. The magnitude of what they had just witnessed was almost incomprehensible. This was not a big explosion. This was a fundamentally new kind of explosion, an explosion of a type that had never existed before in human history.
Oppenheimer, later, when asked about his reaction to the Trinity test, recalled a verse from the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." This was not Oppenheimer boasting about American power. This was Oppenheimer expressing his deep understanding that something had fundamentally changed in the nature of warfare, in the balance of power on Earth, and in human civilization itself. Fermi, the Italian physicist, celebrated by calculating the yield of the explosion based on the deflection of pieces of paper he tossed in the blast wave. Groves immediately sent a coded message to President Harry Truman, who was meeting with Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin at the Potsdam Conference in Germany. The message was simple: babies are satisfactorily born. Translation: the atomic bomb works. Truman received this news at exactly the moment when he was negotiating with Churchill and Stalin about how to end the war with Japan and how to structure the post-war world. Truman knew in that instant that America held a trump card. Japan was still fighting. The Soviet Union had just entered the Pacific War on August 8th. An invasion of the Japanese home islands was planned. Estimates suggested that such an invasion would cost hundreds of thousands of American lives, perhaps millions of Japanese lives. Millions of civilians would be caught in the fighting. But now, with a working atomic bomb, Truman had another option. He could use atomic weapons to shock Japan into surrendering without an invasion. He could save American lives. He could end the war in the Pacific rapidly. On August 6, 1945, the B-29 bomber Enola Gay, piloted by Colonel Paul Tibbets, took off from Tinian Island, carrying the uranium bomb, codenamed Little Boy. The bomb was a simple gun-type design. Essentially, one piece of uranium-235 was fired at another piece to create critical mass and trigger the chain reaction. The bomb was dropped on the city of Hiroshima at 8:15 in the morning. The people of Hiroshima had no idea what was coming. They did not know that America had atomic weapons.
They did not know that a single bomb could destroy an entire city. The bomb detonated at a height of 600 meters, and the effects were absolutely catastrophic. A fireball expanded outward. Temperatures at the hypocenter reached 3,000 degrees Celsius. The blast wave traveled outward at supersonic speeds, destroying buildings for miles around. The thermal radiation ignited fires across the city. A firestorm erupted, consuming entire city blocks. Approximately 70,000 people died instantly. Many more would die in the following weeks and months from radiation sickness and burn injuries. By the end of 1945, the death toll from Hiroshima had reached approximately 140,000 people. 3 days later, on August 9th, a plutonium bomb, codenamed Fat Man, was dropped on the city of Nagasaki. This bomb was even more powerful than the one dropped on Hiroshima. The destruction was equally devastating. Approximately 35,000 people died instantly, with the death toll eventually reaching over 100,000. The Japanese government, stunned by the unprecedented destruction, still hesitated. The military wanted to continue fighting. But then, on August 8th, the Soviet Union had invaded Japanese-held Manchuria, and Stalin declared war on Japan. The combination of atomic bombing and Soviet entry into the war forced the Japanese government to make a decision. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito, in an unprecedented act, personally intervened to break the deadlock and announced Japan's surrender. He said, "We must endure the unendurable." On September 2nd, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, Japanese officials signed the Instrument of Unconditional Surrender. The Pacific War was over. America had won a complete and total victory. With the surrender of Japan on September 2nd, 1945, World War II was officially over. The United States had helped defeat Nazi Germany in Europe and Imperial Japan in Asia. But more than that, America had emerged from World War II as the preeminent global superpower. We had something that no other nation possessed: atomic weapons. We had the industrial capacity that had amazed the world. We had an intact military. We had economic resources. While Europe and Asia lay in rubble, America's cities were untouched. America's factories were operating at peak capacity, and America possessed a monopoly on nuclear weapons. Before the war, America was, frankly, a second-rate global power. We had wealth, but we were isolationist. We had let Britain and France take the lead in global affairs. After World War II, America was unmistakably the leader of the free world. By 1945, America was manufacturing more than half of all goods produced in the entire world. American exports made up more than 1/3 of the total global exports. The United States held roughly 2/3 of all available gold reserves. The American dollar was becoming the world's reserve currency. The pound sterling, which had dominated international finance for over a century, was in decline. The British Empire was in decline. The Soviet Union had been devastated by the war. 27 million Soviet citizens had died. Germany was divided and occupied. Japan was occupied and rebuilt by America. France was rebuilding. Britain was exhausted. America alone stood strong. This dominance was consolidated through institutions that America created or led. The United Nations was founded in 1945, and America was one of its most influential founding members. America became a permanent member of the UN Security Council. The Bretton Woods Conference, held before the war even ended, created a new international monetary system with the American dollar at its center. The IMF and the World Bank were created to manage this new system. American institutions were defining the post-war world order. The Marshall Plan, initiated by Secretary of State Marshall in 1948, pumped $13 billion into the reconstruction of Western Europe. This was not charity, this was strategic. America wanted to create democratic, capitalist allies in Europe that would be stable, prosperous, and loyal to American leadership. And it worked. Western Europe rebuilt and aligned with America against the Soviet threat. The atomic bomb was the ultimate symbol of this American dominance. We had created a weapon that could destroy a city in seconds. We were the only nation that possessed this weapon, at least for the next 4 years. The Soviet Union would not develop an atomic bomb until 1949. Every other nation was years or decades behind. America stood alone at the top of the world, holding the ultimate weapon. This was not American imperialism. This was the natural result of American ingenuity, American industrial might, American scientific achievement, and American determination to defeat the Axis powers and create a better world order. What America accomplished in 1945 was unprecedented. We took scientists and engineers and mathematicians and factory workers from around the world, brought them together under the banner of American freedom and democracy, and in less than 3 years created a weapon that fundamentally changed human civilization. We did something that no other nation could have done. Nazi Germany, despite having excellent scientists, could not develop an atomic bomb before we did. Imperial Japan, with its sophisticated technological base, could not develop an atomic bomb. The Soviet Union, despite its massive industrial base, came years behind us. Only America had the industrial capacity, the scientific talent, the organizational ability, and the political will to pull off something this ambitious in such a short time frame.
The Trinity test was a validation of everything that America stands for. It demonstrated that when free people work together toward a common goal, when we apply science and reason, when we mobilize our resources and our talents, we can accomplish things that seem impossible. It demonstrated that American engineering could accomplish feats that seemed to violate the laws of nature. It demonstrated that American workers, American scientists, and American military leaders could orchestrate one of the most complex projects ever undertaken. The bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was the culmination of this effort. It was a shocking demonstration of American power. It forced Japan to surrender. It saved the lives of countless American soldiers who would have died in an invasion of the Japanese home islands. Some have debated whether the bombings were justified. Some have questioned whether Japan would have surrendered anyway. But the historical record is clear. The Japanese military, even after Hiroshima, wanted to continue fighting. Only the combination of the atomic bombing, Soviet entry into the war, and the Emperor's personal intervention forced surrender. The weapons accomplished their strategic objective. They ended the war in the Pacific in days rather than in months or years of bloody invasion. And in doing so, America became the undisputed leader of the world. We were the strongest military power. We were the strongest economic power. We were the strongest scientific and technological power. We had the atomic bomb, and the rest of the world did not. For a moment, however brief, America stood unchallenged as the greatest power on Earth. This was not arrogance. This was reality. The facts were indisputable. America had won the war. America had developed the ultimate weapon. America had emerged as the leader of the free world. As we look back on 1945, 80 years later, we can say with certainty that the Manhattan Project and the atomic bomb represent one of the greatest achievements in American history. It was the triumph of American science, American engineering, American industry, and American determination. It was a moment when America was at its best, when we focused our talent, our resources, and our will on a single, difficult, seemingly impossible goal. And we achieved it. We did not just match our enemies, we surpassed them completely. We created a weapon that changed the world forever. The Manhattan Project brought together the greatest scientific minds from around the world. General Leslie Groves demonstrated American organizational and military genius in managing this enormously complex undertaking. American workers in factories across the nation, most of them not knowing what they were building, contributed to something that would alter human history.
American soldiers in the Pacific benefited from the ultimate weapon that brought the war to a rapid close. American scientists proved that human ingenuity could unlock the power of the atom itself. This achievement established America as a superpower. It gave America the military and political dominance that would shape the second half of the 20th century. It demonstrated conclusively to the world that America was the preeminent technological, industrial, and military power on the planet. The atomic bomb was not just a weapon, it was a symbol of American exceptionalism, American capability, and American leadership. It proved that when Americans set their minds to solving a problem, even a problem that seems to violate the laws of nature, we can find a solution. We can build it. We can deploy it. We can achieve victory. The legacy of 1945 is a complex one. The atomic bomb has brought both security and fear to the world. But in that moment, in August of 1945, it represented the ultimate triumph of American power and American achievement. It represented the culmination of the greatest war effort in human history. It represented the moment when America became the undisputed leader of the free world. That is the story of the atomic bomb shock of 1945. That is the story of how America built the most devastating weapon in human history and used it to win the greatest war ever fought. That is the story of American triumph, American genius, and American victory.